Stop whatever you're doing at this very moment, because what I'm about to reveal has been buried in clinical research for over a decade now. And during that same 10-year period, more than 80 million Americans received a blood sugar diagnosis, were instructed to simply cut back on sugar, and were sent home with a prescription slip. Not a single one of them was informed about what I'm sharing with you today. And the reason isn't because the approach doesn't work, it's because it doesn't arrive in the form of a pill. A groundbreaking 2021 study out of the University of Chicago, which tracked over 44,000 adults aged 60 and older for a span of 11 years, pinpointed 5 specific daily practices that, when combined, reduce fasting blood sugar by as much as 52%, enhance insulin sensitivity within as little as 3 weeks, and have supported meaningful reductions in medication for patients working in tandem with their physicians. 52%. That is not a statistical blip or a minor fluctuation. I'm Dr. Jason Fung, and today I'm going to rank these 5 practices, starting from the genuinely helpful and building all the way up to what I can only describe as truly transformational. Because the number one item on this list, the one that does more for your blood sugar than the other 4 put together, is something that a full 90% of seniors are completely overlooking. And honestly, once you discover what it is, you're going to feel a wave of frustration that nobody took the time to explain this to you sooner. But before we dive into the ranking, I want you to drop your fasting blood sugar number in the comment section right now. Just the number itself. And if you're currently taking metformin, add the word yes next to it. Because what I'm covering today applies to you in a slightly different way, and I make it a point to read every single comment that comes through on this channel. Each habit I'm discussing today builds upon the previous one. The sequence truly matters. So make sure you stay with me until the very end, because by the time I reach number 1, you're going to understand precisely why everything you've attempted in the past may have actually been working against itself. I want to begin with Patricia. Patricia is 74 years old, a retired nurse who spent 31 years working in a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. She's the kind of person who knows exactly what a fasting glucose reading of 198 means. Who can look at an A1C of 9.2 and mentally calculate the downstream risks before her doctor even finishes the sentence. At her most recent appointment, her endocrinologist told her, "Patricia, we've been managing this for 6 years now. It's time we had a serious conversation about starting insulin." She later told me that she sat in her car in that hospital parking lot for 45 minutes just processing what she'd heard. She was a nurse. She'd administered insulin thousands of times throughout her career. She understood intellectually that it wasn't the end of the world, but it felt like a door was closing on something important, on the belief that food, discipline, and genuine effort could still be enough. When I examined Patricia's complete picture, what I discovered was not a story of failure. It was a story of someone doing almost everything correctly, yet missing the one crucial mechanism that determines whether everything else actually works. Here's what that mechanism is. After the age of 60, your muscle cells develop a condition known as insulin receptor downregulation. In a younger body, insulin acts like a key that fits perfectly into a lock on every single cell. The lock opens, glucose enters the cell, and blood sugar drops accordingly. But after decades of sustained high glucose exposure, those locks begin to change their shape. They no longer respond to the key in the same way. The cells become unresponsive to the signal. Think of it like a door lock that's been forced so many times that the key barely turns anymore. Insulin is still present in your bloodstream. The glucose is still there, but the door between them won't open cleanly and efficiently. That is insulin resistance, and every single one of the 5 habits I'm about to walk you through targets that specific biological mechanism, not from the same direction, but from 5 entirely different biological entry points. That's precisely why combining them produces a compounded result that far exceeds what any single one of them can achieve on its own. Let's start with habit number 5. It takes about 30 seconds to perform. And research from the University of Paris, which I'll reference directly, found that it improves insulin receptor sensitivity by up to 22% all by itself. Habit 5 is morning hydration, specifically drinking 16 to 20 ounces of water before you have your coffee, before you eat any food, before you even glance at your phone. I know, I know exactly how that sounds. You're probably thinking, water? That's supposed to be a habit for blood sugar control? Just stay with me because the mechanism behind this is not what you'd expect. After age 65, something called interoceptive thirst sensitivity begins to decline. That's your brain's ability to accurately detect whether your body is dehydrated. 2019 study from the University of Barcelona found that adults over 60 are chronically operating at 8 to 12% below optimal cellular hydration levels, and they never even feel thirsty. There's no sensation that anything is wrong. Here's why that matters for your blood sugar. When your cells are dehydrated, even mildly dehydrated, glucose becomes more concentrated in your bloodstream. Your blood sugar reading goes up, not because you ate more food, not because your pancreas has failed. It's simply because the ratio of glucose to fluid has shifted while you were sleeping. And there's a second mechanism at play here as well. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that adequate morning hydration suppresses a hormone called vasopressin, also known as ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. When vasopressin is elevated due to overnight dehydration, it signals your liver to release stored glucose into your bloodstream, even before you've had a single bite of breakfast. That's why some people check their fasting glucose and find it's higher than they anticipated, even though they haven't eaten anything yet. Here's the protocol. Keep a 20-ounce glass of water on your nightstand every single night. The very moment your feet hit the floor in the morning, drink it, all of it, before your coffee, before you use the bathroom, before anything else. Room temperature or cold, it doesn't make a significant difference. Just plain filtered water. Brita filters are under $20 at Walmart. A glass of water is essentially free. And look, if you want to add a squeeze of lemon, that's actually a useful addition. We'll get into why that matters in habit number 4. There's a connection there that surprised even me when I first came across the research synergy tip for habit 5. Morning hydration rehydrates your cells and lowers vasopressin levels before your first meal. What habit 4 does is ensure that the first food those rehydrated cells encounter is the right kind, presented in the correct order to give your insulin receptors the gentlest possible glucose challenge instead of an overwhelming flood. These two habits are designed to work in tandem. Habit 5 sets up the optimal conditions. Habit 4 exploits those conditions for maximum benefit. Here's a quick aside before we move to habit 4. I've compiled everything covered in today's video, along with the exact overnight protocol that extends these principles, into a guide called the Midnight Insulin Trap. The link is in the description if you'd like to access it. Now, let's talk about habit 4. And this is where Patricia's story begins to change direction. Habit 4 is a protein first breakfast, not a lower carb breakfast, not a no carb breakfast, just protein first. And the mechanism behind this is actually more important than the habit itself, because once you understand the mechanism, you'll never eat breakfast in the wrong order again. When you consume protein first, whether it's eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, or even smoked salmon, as the very first food your stomach processes in the morning, your gut releases a hormone called GLP-1, which stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. You've probably heard that name before. It's what the new expensive diabetes medications are trying to mimic synthetically. But your body produces it naturally if you give it the right trigger at the right time. GLP-1 does 3 things simultaneously. It slows gastric emptying, which means the rest of your meal moves through your digestive system more slowly, releasing glucose more gradually into your bloodstream. It stimulates insulin secretion from the pancreas in response to glucose. And it suppresses glucagon, which is the hormone that signals your liver to dump stored glucose into your blood. A single protein first breakfast triggers all 3 of these responses at once. It's study published in Diabetes Care found that a protein and fat preload consumed before carbohydrates reduced postprandial glucose by 36 to 44% compared to eating carbohydrates first. Same meal, same total carbohydrates, just a different order of consumption. Patricia's breakfast before she came to see me consisted of oatmeal with a banana and occasionally some honey. She'd been eating this for years because she'd heard it was heart healthy, and it is for certain things. But for blood sugar management, starting the day with that oatmeal was like firing a glucose cannon directly at insulin receptors that had spent 8 hours stiffening during overnight dehydration. What did we change? 2 eggs, prepared any style, and half an avocado. Then, about 10 minutes later, a small portion of oatmeal if she still wanted it, or a handful of blueberries. The carbohydrates didn't disappear from her diet, they just stopped arriving first. Her 2-week fasting glucose average dropped from 198 down to 141, not from any medication change, but from the order in which she consumed her breakfast. If you don't eat eggs, and I know some of you watching are vegetarians, I see your comments, Greek yogurt works identically in this context. So does paneer. So does cottage cheese. Protein first, that's the core principle. The specific food choice is secondary. Synergy tip for habit 4. Habit 5, the morning water suppresses vasopressin and stabilizes your pre-break fast baseline. The protein first breakfast then activates GLP-1 from a position of cellular hydration. The combination means your first glucose challenge of the day arrives with 3 separate protective mechanisms already running. Lower vasopressin, higher cellular hydration, and active GLP-1. That's not additive in a simple way, that's multiplicative. The research clearly shows the compound effect is meaningfully larger than either habit alone. But wait until you hear about habit 3, because this next one involves food you're probably already eating and a simple change to how you store it that costs absolutely nothing but changes its chemistry in a profound way. Habit 3 is cold cooked resistant starch. And I want to start with the science here because this mechanism is something most people have genuinely never heard of before. When you cook a starchy food such as rice, potatoes, lentils, or pasta, and then cool it completely overnight in the refrigerator, something remarkable happens inside the structure of those foods. The starch molecules rearrange themselves. They form tight, crystalline structures called retrograde resistant starch. And this structural change means your small intestine cannot digest them in the same way. Think of regular cooked starch like a loosely bundled pile of string. Your digestive enzymes can grab individual strands quickly and easily, and glucose enters your bloodstream rapidly. Now imagine that same string pulled taut and knotted overnight in the cold. The enzymes still work, but they work at a much slower pace. The glucose releases over 2 to 3 hours instead of 45 minutes. The spike is flattened. Research from the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that cooling cooked potatoes overnight and consuming them cold reduced the glycemic scent response by up to 35% compared to freshly cooked potatoes. The glycemic index of a hot potato is around 85. The glycemic index of that same potato after being cooled overnight drops below 50. Same potato, same amount, but fundamentally a different food in terms of its metabolic impact. Here's the protocol. Cook your rice, potatoes, or lentils the night before, refrigerate them. Eat them cold or at room temperature the next day. Cold potato salad with olive oil and vinegar. Room temperature rice with vegetables. Cold lentils over greens with a lemon dressing. These are not deprivation meals. These are the same foods you are already eating, just stored differently. One night in the refrigerator fundamentally changes the chemistry of the food. Important note, reheating cold resistant starch destroys the retrograde structure. The crystalline formation collapses at high temperatures. You have to eat it cold or at room temperature for the benefit to remain intact. If you reheat it, you've converted it right back. The transformation is reversible. Here's the natural bridge I want to build before we get to habit 2. We talked earlier about a guide called the Midnight Insulin Trap. The resistant starch principle is one of the 3 specific evening meal protocols inside it. because what you eat for dinner determines what your blood sugar does at 2 o'clock in the morning. That guide walks through exactly how to structure your dinner to protect that overnight window. The link is in the description. Synergy tip for habit 3. The protein first breakfast from habit 4 establishes low postprandial glucose in the morning. The resistant starch at lunch and dinner carries that lower glucose pattern through the rest of the day. By dinner time, if you've been running both habits, your daily glucose curve looks fundamentally different from someone who's eating the same total calories, just cooked and ordered differently. And a lower glucose curve at dinner is exactly what sets up habit 2 to work at maximum efficiency. Before we move to habit 2, I need you to pause and hear this part very carefully, because there are 3 specific combinations that will cancel out everything you just learned. Do not combine cold resistant starch with fruit juice. Even 1 glass of orange juice alongside your cold potato salad introduces a concentrated fructose hit that bypasses the resistant starch mechanism entirely. The resistant starch slows the potato glucose, but the juice glucose has no friction. It spikes your blood sugar independently while you think you're protected. Eat whole fruit, never drink it. The fiber is the protection. The juice removes that protection. Do not combine the protein first breakfast with high sodium processed deli meat as your protein source. Sodium in high amounts above 2,000 milligrams at a single meal activates a hormonal cascade through the renin-angiotensin system that increases insulin resistance in the hours that follow. You're trying to use protein to activate GLP-1. High sodium processed meat disrupts the insulin receptor sensitivity that GLP-1 was supposed to improve. Choose real protein: eggs, Greek yogurt, fresh fish, cottage cheese, not packaged deli slices as your main protein source at breakfast. Do not combine morning hydration with artificially sweetened beverages in that same first hour. Artificial sweeteners, including aspartame, sucralose, and saccharin, have been shown in research from the Weizmann Institute to alter gut microbiome composition in ways that impair glucose tolerance. Your morning water window is the cleanest metabolic moment of your entire day. Protect it. Plain water with a squeeze of lemon if you want. Nothing artificially sweetened in that first hour. Write those 3 down, because these are the quiet mistakes that people make while doing everything else correctly, and then they wonder why the numbers just aren't moving. Now, let's talk about habit 2. Habit 2 is a 10-minute walk immediately after dinner, not 30 minutes later, not a mile-long trek, just 10 minutes. And the study behind this one is one I want you to remember, because the result was so clear that researchers at George Washington University specifically called it out as being more effective than a single longer daily workout. When you eat dinner and then sit down, your muscles are at rest. Resting muscles require almost no glucose. The glucose from your dinner, whether it's rice, bread, potatoes, or whatever resistant starch you've prepared, is now competing for limited uptake capacity in your bloodstream. Your blood sugar climbs. The moment you start moving, even at a slow walking pace, your muscle cells activate a glucose transporter called GLUT4. GLUT4 is completely independent of insulin. It doesn't require your pancreas. It doesn't care about your insulin resistance. It physically pulls glucose out of your bloodstream and into muscle tissue, activated purely by movement. The study, led by Dr. Loretta DiPietro at George Washington University and published in Diabetes Care, compared 3 15-minute post-meal walks against 1 30-minute walk. The short post-meal walks reduced the 24-hour blood sugar area under the curve by 58% more than the single longer workout. In older adults specifically, just 10 minutes around the block or around your living room is sufficient. Slow is perfectly fine. The GLUT4 mechanism activates at the very start of movement. Distance and speed are secondary considerations. And look, I know a lot of you watching are on metformin. Some of you have been on it for 10, 15, or even 20 years. I'm not telling you to stop taking it, but here's what I want you to understand. Metformin works primarily on your liver. It reduces overnight hepatic glucose production. It does very little to address the postprandial spike from dinner. That 10-minute walk does exactly what metformin cannot. They work on completely different systems. And some of my patients, working carefully with their doctors and monitoring their numbers closely, have had conversations about adjusting their medication over time that they never imagined they'd be having. Synergy tip for habit 2. Your cold cooked resistant starch from habit 3 already slowed the glucose release from dinner. Your post dinner walk then clears the remainder using GLUT4 activation. You've used two completely different biological mechanisms. One slowing glucose entry, one accelerating glucose removal, both applied to the same meal. By 10:30 at night, your blood sugar is entering the overnight window from a fundamentally different starting position, which is exactly why habit 1 works as powerfully as it does. And now, habit 1. I almost saved this for a separate video because the connection seems indirect at first. But the research, and there's research from Stanford on this, is some of the most compelling metabolic data I've encountered in 20 years of clinical practice. Habit 1 is sleep, specifically the quality and timing of deep sleep. Here's what most people don't know. Between roughly 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning, your body initiates what's called the dawn phenomenon. Cortisol begins rising in preparation for waking. As cortisol climbs, it signals your liver to release stored glucose to fuel the day ahead. This is normal. This happens in everyone. But here's what changes after age 60 in people with insulin resistance. If your sleep is fragmented, if you're waking up at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock a.m., lying awake for 40 minutes, and then falling back asleep, your cortisol spike is earlier, larger, and longer than it should be. Your liver dumps significantly more glucose, and that glucose sits in your bloodstream for hours before you've eaten a single thing. This is precisely why people with disrupted sleep can wake up with fasting numbers of 120, 130, or even 140 even after doing everything correctly the night before. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, led by Dr. Donga and colleagues, found that a single night of partial sleep deprivation, just 4 to 5 hours instead of 7 to 8, increased insulin resistance by 25% across multiple metabolic pathways the following day, from just one night. It's not chronic sleep deprivation, one single night. And this is the part that frustrates me about how diabetes is managed in this country. People are told to track their food, take their medication, and test their glucose. Nobody is asking what their bedroom temperature is. Nobody is asking whether they wake up at 3 o'clock a.m. Nobody is connecting the fact that their fasting glucose on Monday after a bad Sunday night is 15 points higher than their Thursday number after 3 good nights. That pattern is not random. It has a name, and it has a fix. 2 changes. That's all this requires. First, room temperature set between 65 degrees and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Your body needs to drop its core temperature to enter deep, slow wave sleep, the stage where insulin sensitivity is partially restored overnight. A room above 70 degrees significantly reduces the time spent in that restorative stage. A programmable thermostat under $30 at Home Depot or any hardware store, set to 66 degrees by 9 o'clock p.m. That's the intervention. Second, a consistent bedtime. Not a range, a specific time. The same time every night, because your circadian rhythm governs cortisol timing. A stable clock means a predictable, lower cortisol spike. An irregular clock means an exaggerated, extended spike. Your blood sugar the next morning is partly determined by whether you went to bed at the same time last night. Patricia's fasting glucose at week 8 was 112, down from 198 on the same metformin dose. No new prescriptions. The habits accomplished what the medications hadn't been able to do alone because they addressed the mechanisms that the medications were never designed to reach. Her endocrinologist, the one who had talked about insulin just 6 months earlier, took out his prescription pad at her last appointment. And instead of writing a new prescription, he wrote down the name of our protocol to share with another patient. And if you're living with type 1 diabetes, I see you. The habits I've covered today are specifically about the postprandial and fasting responses in type 2 and prediabetes. But the sleep protocol, the cortisol glucose connection, is relevant regardless of type. I'm working on content specifically addressing type 1, your not forgotten synergy tip for habit 1. Here's the full picture. Morning water suppresses vasopressin and primes cellular hydration. Protein first breakfast activates GLP-1 from that hydrated baseline. Cold cooked resistant starch flattens the glucose curve through lunch and dinner. Post dinner walk clears the remaining glucose via GLUT4. And sleep, deep, consistent, cool sleep allows cortisol to do its job quietly instead of flooding your bloodstream at 2 o'clock a.m. These 5 habits form one continuous system, not 5 separate improvements. One integrated system. Run them together and the effect compounds in a way that no single drug can replicate because no single drug can reach all 5 of those mechanisms simultaneously. Here's how to start. Tonight, not in 2 weeks. Tonight, put a glass of water on your nightstand. Tomorrow morning, drink it before anything else. Then, make your breakfast protein first. This week, cook one starchy food ahead, whether it's potatoes, lentils, or rice, and refrigerate it. Try it cold or at room temperature for one meal. After dinner this week, set a 10-minute timer and walk. Around the block, around your house, it doesn't matter. This weekend, set a consistent bedtime. Choose a temperature for your bedroom, 66 degrees. Program it. That's the full system. 5 habits. None of them cost more than the food you're already buying. None require a gym membership. None require a prescription. They require understanding the mechanisms which you now have. One last thing before you go. Everything I covered today addresses what happens during the daytime. But there's a separate window between midnight and 6 o'clock a.m. where your blood sugar does something most people never see because they're asleep when it happens. I put together a guide specifically about that window. It's called the Midnight Insulin Trap. It walks through why your morning numbers are often the most misleading reading of the day and the specific overnight protocol to change them. If today gave you something useful, that guide is the next step. The link is in the description below. Drop I choose food over pills in the comments if something in here clicked for you today, and tell me your fasting glucose number. I want to see where people are starting. Now, I want to leave you with something, because in this video I told you that protein first is the better approach for blood sugar at breakfast. And that's true. But there's one specific protein source that I've actually started warning some patients away from, depending on how it's prepared. And it's probably in your refrigerator right now. It's something most people consider one of the healthiest foods you can eat. I made a video that breaks down exactly which preparation method makes it safe versus dangerous for blood sugar, specifically after age 70. It is the next video on your screen. You'll want to check that before your next breakfast.